Dr. Sylvia Wanzala Martin is actually going to talk about meat and the harvest facility pathway analysis that we've done. And so while her talk is being uploaded there, and you're going to use a microphone that will be hand delivered to you by a colleague, or use this one, I'm going to introduce Dr. Sylvia Wanzala Martin. She is a risk analyst with our Secure Food Systems team here at the University of Minnesota, and she focuses on proactive approaches to optimize animal, plant, and product movements from uninfected farms during a disease outbreak. She's a veterinarian with a PhD in veterinary infectious disease research and public health. Here is your microphone. This is our last talk of the day, and after this talk, or of this session, this is our last talk of this session. After this talk, I'd welcome questions of any of our speakers if time allows as well.
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, so harvest facilities. Thank you, Mickey and Caitlin, for just giving a great background for my discussion. Yeah, so we're going to look at harvest facilities. What pathways do we have for African swine fever at slaughter? So preparing for African swine fever in the US, if it was to enter the United States, there would be a lot of disruptions to the pork industry and actually in every aspect of production. So in order to protect the swine industry and the supply of pork products, it's important for the industry to be prepared at every step of the process. And it was also important for us to know the flow, like what actually happens, what goes in, and what comes out of these harvest facilities. And so we set out to look at these pathways, and what we did was wanted to consider what is coming, what are the inputs that are coming into the facility, what are the outputs that are leaving the facility, in order to see what is the full cycle of potential virus entry and exit into the facility in the case of an uninfected but undetected pig being processed. So these were the objectives that we set out to do. We wanted to determine the inputs and outputs of pork harvest facilities. And then after doing that, to define those pathways and categorize them by mitigation levels. And then after doing that, with the help of industry, to assign priorities in order to conduct a full risk assessment based on the perceived risk of the pathways. We looked at, so our work was actually focused on mainly our scope was on US-based pork harvest facilities that conduct on-site slaughter of market hogs and include primal cuts among their products. These are federally inspected facilities that transport meat across state lines or internationally, and they also must have federal inspectors to ensure there's compliance with USDA regulations. We did literature scans to determine what are the main inputs and outputs of the harvest facilities. We also looked at the hazard identification for African swine fever and looked at the characteristics. How does this virus behave? How does it survive? For instance, an example is African swine fever virus is heat inactivated at 133 degrees Fahrenheit if that is done for 70 minutes, or 140 degrees Fahrenheit if that is done for 20 minutes. So factors like that, how the virus behaves, were critical to see how the harvest facility is actually processing product and what is happening once the product leaves the premises. We consulted with collaborators in 2 large Midwestern pork harvest facilities that process approximately 20,000 hogs daily. One of the facilities is an integrated company where producers own the facility, and then the other one, they procure slaughter pigs from the market. And so we felt that these facilities would be representative of the industry standards. Also the fact that they are regulated by the federally regulated, that means there would be little room or variation between them. So we felt they would be representative. What we did, we had meetings with company representatives to see the flow of process of the products. We also visited, we toured the plants and asked questions to the various people at the plants. And then in addition to doing that, we looked at literature to see what are the regulations, what are the practices within the industry, and then what is also FSIS, what does that look like for the harvest facilities. So generically, the public might think what goes into a harvest facility is probably pigs, maybe trucks carrying the pigs and people, and most likely the output might be maybe waste than the products. But when we went to talk to these various representatives of the industry, we learned that the process is actually very, very complex, and it's beyond that. So our preliminary results led us to just showing this level of complexity. Well, we saw, just to help you walk through this image, we have the blue boxes. So those are just showing the major outputs that are coming out of the harvest facilities. The ones in gold are showing products that are destined for rendering. And then we also have on the left side where we have bidirectional arrows that indicate products that are moving in both directions. So we have inputs that are coming in as well as a large variety of outputs that are coming out. And so we determined about 7 major broad input categories. And also, again, this also varies depending on the harvest facility you are talking to. But 7 major ones, there are people, equipment and supplies, the pigs themselves, pests, water, animal-derived inputs and vehicles. So those were the major buckets for the inputs. And then we had a multitude of outputs. And we also tried to group them because, again, the output it's dependent on the harvest facility that you are approaching. We came up to about 18 major buckets for the outputs in this pathway analysis. This, again, is just showing the level of complexity of the inputs and outputs that are coming out of the harvest facility. And we can see arrows, the various arrows. The blue arrows are indicating the movement that is coming into the plant. And then we have gold and the green as well, the green arrows that are showing what is coming out of the harvest facility. I'm just going to zero in on just one of these products and just to show you. So for instance, if I look at the waste, typically when we think of waste, if we don't have like exposure to the harvest facility, we might think it's just one thing that comes out. But we learned that it's broken down into several different products. We have wastewater, we have waste fats, pre-treated wastewater, waste solids, sludge, manure. So all these are different outputs that are coming out, and they are also handled differently by the plant. And we learned that for these plants that we talked to, they can have in excess of 2.5 million gallons of liquid that are leaving the plant. That is a lot of liquid that is leaving of wastewater. And so what happens, how do they deal with this wastewater? Because that's a large volume and it's on a daily basis. So for the wastewater, they typically take that into a skim tank. It is settled and then separated out into various components. And then, for instance, the solids are taken out and then they're rendered by an independent renderer. And then we have the liquid component. Some of that is taken for treatment at a waste treatment plant. So you see that each of these products has to be looked at separately. So given this background, we now looked at how do we label these different pathways. So we came up with those 4 different levels of defining the pathway. So we considered a pathway to be fully mitigated in our work if within the pathway there's a procedure or protocol that eliminates the virus, either through inactivation or through exclusion. So we further said, okay, fine, it eliminates it, but is there compliance across the various harvest facilities that we are looking at? So we said it has to have inactivation or exclusion, and you needed to have 100% compliance across the facilities that we are looking at. Then we said, okay, what is unmitigated? Unmitigated is if we didn't find any evidence as we did our work, our research, for that pathway to eliminate the virus. Partially mitigated was when there was a mixture. So we noticed that some of them they might be mitigation in one aspect, but by the time it leaves the harvest facility, it's not completely mitigated. So that would not support the complete elimination of the virus. The unknown label was when we were not sure. We were not sure of what happened in the pathway. That's because either there's insufficient pathway information. Some of the things we learned that some of the processes were proprietary and were not able to access that information. So that came into unknown. But unknown means that it can also be a potential area where it can move to either fully mitigated if we get all the sufficient information to see if they actually have those mitigations within their process. So what inputs? The 7 inputs that we found were people. So people would include like personnel who are coming in, the inspection people who are coming in, service providers, visitors. We bucketed that as people who are coming into the harvest facility. We saw that this was actually partially mitigated. Some of the aspects had mitigation, some did not. So overall, that pathway was partially mitigated. Pigs were coming in for slaughter. Those were unmitigated. Vehicles, equipment, water, and pests and ingredients. I just want to talk a little bit about the water. So water is, of the 7 that we have, water was the one that we saw that was actually a fully mitigated pathway. And that's because there are requirements within the Code of Federal Regulations for the water that is used at harvest facilities to be potable and to be to comply with the standards. So that one we saw that was fully mitigated. The others are areas that can have potential to also be fully mitigated if the processes are followed for that. Now our outputs were quite many. Again, we also bucketed those. People, again, they're coming in and they're also leaving the facility. Vehicles, there's a lot of movement. These plants have live haul vehicles that are actually bringing in the pigs. We have rendering trucks that are also leaving, taking product out and waste out, trucks hauling product and others. So we saw there were multiple outputs that are leaving the facility. And then we tried to look at, okay, so all these are leaving, but where do we have the African swine fever virus kill step? Where do we have that step before these outputs leave the plant? So we focused on only the facility and what is leaving and coming in, just at that point. And so when we put these two, the inputs and outputs together, we saw that of the 25, both the inputs and outputs, we saw the fully mitigated pathways were water, processed product, and rendered product. And that came to about 12%. But again, these figures are not cast in stone. It's as we continue to gather more information, this graph, this pie chart is definitely going to be changing as well. And then the unmitigated, we saw quite a bit of the products were actually unmitigated. That is highlighted in red, partially mitigated, and then unknown. And so when we look at rendered products, rendering typically what happens is what the product that is being rendered is heated to about 240 to 290 degrees Fahrenheit for about 40 to 90 minutes. And that temperature alone, it highly exceeds what is required to inactivate African swine fever virus. So using that background, there's a high certainty that rendered products, once they leave the facility, they are fully mitigated. And then when we look at vehicles, we saw that a lot of vehicles that come into, there's actually no current mandate for them to undergo cleaning and disinfection when they come on, before they leave the premises. So we saw that that process alone, that is unmitigated. And various vehicles come to the plant as we saw. So that is an area that can also be looked into more. In addition, the North American Meat Institute, it recommends these plants to have maps of all traffic that is coming in and leaving. And they also recommend one-way traffic flow. And not everyone is doing that, but that is a recommendation that can be considered by these harvest facilities. The next people, we also noticed that there was some mitigations for the people pathway, and so that's why it's in the partially mitigated, because there were some and then the others where it wasn't the case. Some plants provide dedicated footwear and clothing for their employees on the kill floor, but not everybody was doing that, and that's why it's fitting in the partially mitigated across the harvest facilities we looked at. And then some facilities, the employees were actually wearing their own shoes into the facility. So we looked at that as something that could be that's why it came under the partially mitigated for that. And then process, some products were actually unknown if there was an African swine fever virus kill step. An example I can give is ready-to-eat products. So it's in the unknown category because we don't have sufficient information, again, probably because of proprietary processes, so we can't really tell. But again, if the harvest facility is able to look at what is required to make sure there's inactivation or exclusion, then that can move from unknown into fully mitigated. So I also want to talk a little bit about the sealed inedible products. That one is in purple because it was something that was an interesting challenge for us. So we felt that, yes, it's falling under unmitigated, but it's a little bit unique in the sense that sealed inedible products, the examples I'm going to talk about are three. So for instance, whole blood, citrated plasma, red blood cells. These products their integrity needs to be maintained the way they are. And so they cannot go through the African swine fever kill step before they leave the facility. But the way they leave the facility is in sealed containers. So they are sealed before they leave. So how do we categorize those specific products? And so that was an interesting challenge for us. So we, at the moment, we've left it as unmitigated, but then we're thinking, if it's in a sealed container, it has to be like that because the value has to be maintained because that's what it's supposed to be like. So we don't think it's possible to put a kill step with that at the moment. And then also, since they're moved in a sealed container, there's the potential for spread along the route is also unlikely because of the way it's transported. So the next step, so with all this information that we looked at, we saw that, okay, what are the first things that we can probably focus on? Because we have a lot. If we look at the unmitigated, partially mitigated, unknown, it's a long list. So where would be a good place to start? So we felt that probably these 5 areas would be a good place to start and see how can we work with industry to work in these areas and either determine a full risk assessment, like my colleagues had talked about earlier, and actually dig deeper to see what else can we do to make sure that we see what is actually happening at that process. So we haven't done a full risk assessment yet, but we've started the discussion. The steps have already begun, but this would be a good place to continue. We are working hand in hand with our industry collaborators to also just delineate these gaps. Where are the gaps? How can we continue to figure these gaps out and then work with them to see if we can conduct a full risk assessment, and basically so that we can support the industry can find continued operation in the event of an African swine fever outbreak. So I would like to acknowledge USDA NIFA for funding this work, and we also the Secure Food Systems team that has been very instrumental with this work. We work together as a team, and our various collaborators in the pork harvest industry. And this is our team, as well as exec, and some of my colleagues are here. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Definitely have time for questions. And which one you want to use? There's a question in the left front there. Here's this for you.
Oh,
Thanks very much for that. Very interesting. So, if I've got this right, one of your highest risk inputs is vehicles going into the plant, but not coming out of the plant.
it's both, actually.
Both ways.
Yeah.
Vehicles input.
Well, I think it's on the next slide. It's,
Oh, it could be the next slide, yeah.
we have it as the both. Yeah, so they're also mitigated.
Yeah.
Outputs, there you go. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I missed that bit. Thank you.
You know, I think pigs are probably always, in most diseases, the pig itself that's the biggest risk. And I guess my comment would be on, or comment question would be on your ways you do your risk assessment on the pigs themselves. A couple factors. First, how long has the pig been in the market chain? So in other words, the longer in the chain, the bigger the risk that they've picked up ASF somewhere in the chain and are incubating it, but not yet clinical. So I think time is a factor you need to look at and because there's a certain percentage of the pigs that, whether it's a plant breakdown or a weather event or a weekend, may stay in that marketing chain 4, 5, 6 days in pens that are less than sanitary. So and each plant's going to vary a little bit in what percentage of their slaughter may come from that type of situation. And then, of course, the sanitation in the lairage at each plant's going to be a factor. So I think that's an area that you ought to consider as you look at these plants is how fresh are the pigs and what's the sanitation and what's their who are they buying from and how much, and the pigs that are being reshipped, you know, they always run the risk of being infected where they come from and then infecting the plant they go to, or getting infected in the truck that takes them between. So I don't know how you quantify all that, but those are the areas that keep me awake at night. as far as ASF.
Yeah, and you might, Sylvia, do you want to comment how we visited a sow slaughter facility and we thought, well, we'll just put this all together, and how we found that it should be separate?
Yep. Yeah, thanks for your comment and question. Yeah, so all those are things that we were thinking about, like time. All these plants are actually very different in the way they process. Some of them, the pigs are processed like immediately, maybe within the day. Others, again, as you said, it also depends. Yeah, we visited the sow plant and we wanted to see, okay, can we just add this to the market hog processing? No, it's actually completely different. So again, as we do the full risk assessment, that's when we'll have to dig deeper and see what are the time factors. And then the modeling will have to come in again to see what are those likelihoods of the transmission for these different factors. Yeah.
So building a little bit on that question, I know these are pathogen-specific risk assessments, but I'm wondering, have you all considered whether they can be generalized across some of these different risk assessments done for the secure pork supply as a whole to change maybe those baseline industry standards, or to look for general vulnerabilities for any biological agent or other types of threats to the food supply?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a great question, and it's twofold. So the scaffolding, right, of how the risk assessment is built can be the same across commodities in a sense and across pathogens. And then the industry background information can be the same, but you're really dealing with that best information possible about that pathogen in that matrix or thing. So, that's where we have the secure pork supply plan, or even the National Poultry Improvement Program. Those are general biosecurity recommendations that should work across for a lot of pathogens. But then to really target a specific pathogen like African swine fever, like highly pathogenic avian influenza, like virus hemorrhagic septicemia of trout, sorry. Those are actually quite specific. And so you have to, yes, we do general things, just like when we all cook in our own kitchens, we wash our hands, right? But then when we're working with, what entity should I? Raw beef, they're not in the room, right? We don't then use the same cutting board for raw beef, but you might use the same cutting board when you're going from your tomatoes in your garden versus the peppers you bought at the store or something like that. So it's kind of specific like that. I did want to mention, as far as pigs to market, John, to help you sleep at night a little bit. So part of the work that we've done, that we've presented in different capacities, is evaluating active surveillance protocols for moving finishing pigs to a harvest facility from a control area during an outbreak of African swine fever in the United States. And that manuscript is currently in final review prior to submission for publication. So that'll be out there. That's some of the work that we did on the quantitative side that we've presented in pieces, and now putting that all together. And so that really builds up this pathway analysis and that modeling framework. Those preliminary modeling results can come together for that risk assessment of pigs to slaughter, which would be the obvious next step, I think, there. So